At 1:23 and 45 seconds on April 26, 1986, the number 4 reactor at Chernobyl nuclear power plant suffered a catastrophic nuclear accident. The explosion and resulting radiation would be directly blamed for the deaths of 28 individuals and the evacuation and abandonment of the Ukrainian town of Pripyat. The new HBO miniseries Chernobyl tells the harrowing story of the immediate aftermath, fallout, and cover-up of the accident. Let's take a look.
All of the good we did, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that to them, justice was done. See, a just world is a sane world. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl.
I'm pleased to report that the situation in Chernobyl is stable. In terms of radiation, I'm told it's the equivalent of a chest X-ray.
No, Chernobyl is on fire. And every atom of uranium is like a bullet, penetrating everything in its path. Metal, concrete, flesh. Now, Chernobyl holds over 3 trillion of these bullets. Some of them will not stop firing for 50,000 years.
Tell me how to put it out.
You are dealing with something that has never occurred on this planet before.
Cut the phone lines. Contain the spread of misinformation.
What will happen to our boys?
The pain is unimaginable. In 3 days to 3 weeks, you're dead.
You can see him, and you cannot touch him. Do you understand?
What happened on the night of the accident?
Asking the right question will get you the truth. There is no truth.
What happened there? What happened after? All of it. All of it. Madness.
Please welcome the star of Chernobyl, Jared Harris. So, Jared, tell us a little about your character, who you're playing, and how they got involved with the cleanup of Chernobyl.
I play Valery Legasov. He is a real person, and he was responsible for figuring out what had happened, how bad it was, and then trying to figure out how you fixed it, which was a pretty difficult thing to do because it had never happened before. And there was no blueprint for what do you do when a nuclear reactor blows up and starts spewing radiation into the atmosphere, you know? And he, I mean, largely, certainly in our story, he's the sort of Cassandra character from the Trojan myths, because the person who has that information, you're giving somebody truths that they don't want to hear. They would rather something else be the reality that they're going to have to deal with. So there's a lot of resistance to what he's proposing, and what he's saying is actually happening down there. And once he gets down there, they pretty quickly realize that it's a lot worse than they could have imagined, and then they start listening to him.
Speaking of difficult, one thing that really struck me about your character is that he has to make a lot of very hard choices, effectively sending a lot of men to their deaths.
Yeah.
What is it like not only playing a scene like that, but finding that character that will make those hard choices?
Well, I mean, it's certainly not something that a person like that would ever imagine they would be in that situation. I mean, personally, I can't imagine. I mean, you have to imagine, but I can't imagine what it would feel like in the sense that if I had to do that, I think you'd probably start sectioning off parts of your brain, and you compartmentalize and you start making sort of really bad deals with yourself about, well, it will save X number of lives and stuff like that. I don't think it's ever something that he ever resolves, certainly not in our story, that he ever comfortably resolves with himself. And there are several moments where he witnesses these acts of heroism, where people selflessly agree to step into these essentially fatal situations. And in our story, the way that I dealt with it as that character was that he when he witnesses those moments of heroism, it almost shames him into the having to make those tough decisions and not allowing it to be a personal thing for himself.
One thing that really struck me about this show is that it was one of the scariest shows I've watched in a very, very long time. Good. It's horrifying, and also to know that it really happened.
Yeah.
Was there ever a moment that the reality of it all struck you? Was there a scene or a moment where you were on set that
we were out there, so there were several, I think there's about 20 of these plants built around the Soviet Union, all exactly the same design as the Chernobyl plant. And we were at there's a couple of them remaining, and there's one at Ignalina. And we shot on site there, and it was, it's in Lithuania. And when Lithuania applied to the EU to become part of the EU, they said, yeah, you can join, but you've got to decommission that plant because it's exactly the same design as the Chernobyl plant. So yeah, we were there, which was wild. We were under machine gun guards the whole time. I don't know what they thought we were going to do, but and supposedly all the nuclear material had been taken out, but rather cryptically they told us that we weren't allowed to shoot there on a Tuesday before 4 p.m. because they were still taking the material out. So that brings it back to you, and you speak to people in restaurants, and when you're out walking around chatting to people, they figure out what you're doing, and they still have stories of people who are connected to it. Their grandparents or stuff like that were there at the time.
Was there any one story that still stuck with you?
Well, I mean, the one that affected me most was actually in this book called Voices from Chernobyl, and it's this really a very affecting story about. So they were evacuated from the town, but a lot of people tried to go back afterwards, and there's some people who moved back to go and live there because they had family history there. But there's one story of this man who he goes back 2 years afterwards to steal his front door. And he steals his front door, straps it to his back, and then he rides a motorbike whilst he's being chased by security forces who are shooting after him. And he needs to get his front door back to where he's now living in Moscow, because it's a tradition that he has with his culture, his family, that when a family member dies, you have to lay them out on the front door. So his great-grandfather, his grandfather, his parents were all laid out on this door. And then you put the door back on. And he needs the door because his daughter's dying. Oh, wow. And she's dying from the radiation poisoning.
Wow. I don't know how to follow that question up. That's really powerful.
You asked.
Yes. But you worked opposite Stellan Skarsgård and Emily Watson. And I was wondering what it was like working with them on this project.
They're lovely people. I mean, really. Stellan is he's really funny, and he's got just a great attitude. And Emily, I mean, her first job was with Stellan on Breaking the Waves, so
which is
her first film role.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a real strong bond between the two of them, and she's got a great sense of humor. And you need it on things like this because they're such grim days, when you're sitting there dealing with these situations. And even though we begged for it, there's not a lot of, there were no jokes. There weren't a lot of jokes. So you try and keep yourself buoyed up during the whole process, you know. Plus, the World Cup was on at the time, and he's Swedish, and England was playing Sweden during the filming, so we got to gang up on him.
Was there anything they ever did on set? I'm always kind of curious with actors of your caliber. Like, is there anything that you found them doing in a scene that you're like, oh man, I wonder how they got to that moment, or something that you learned off of them or they learned off of you?
Well, I don't know. They learn anything off of me, but I mean, you know, you're always being surprised by the work that your scene partners are doing. When you study scenes, you're obviously studying it from your point of view, and you think that you've imagined this whole experience, but it's the moment you're in front of somebody else and they're doing it their way, it always throws you, because you suddenly realize, you understand how they're coming, where they're coming at it from. You didn't imagine it from that point of view. You know, they're always just very, very real and really grounded, and Stellan has a very wonderful thing of he always manages to find humor in everything that he's doing. So I was actually quite envious of that. And you know, and Emily is just it's a really very, very powerful, her characters are sort of is the speaker of truth in the piece. So I actually experience that as being quite difficult, because she's quite often forcing my character to do things that he doesn't want to do, particularly towards the end.
Yeah, there's when he has to speak truth to power. That was a really great scene. One thing I was wondering about that scene specifically was you have to basically explain nuclear fission. How much research did you do for that one scene?
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand what you're talking about, and obviously, I'm an actor, so probably not that good at science and physics and mathematics and stuff like that. So, luckily, Craig had figured out a way to explain it so that it was easy for, certainly for me to understand. I got pretty good. I mean, I made sure that I understood what I was talking about, and that I can explain how a nuclear reactor works, and I can explain what went wrong that night. I understand why it went wrong. So
a lot of that courtroom scenes was filmed. And did you watch any of the old footage to sort of get into your character?
The first day and the last day were made public, but all the intervening days were all really? Sealed. Yeah.
So did you watch any? But did you watch any footage of Valery?
There's some available. Yeah.
Yeah, because I saw some at the very end of the film.
There's some available. And again, it's kind of one of those things that there was a tremendous commitment on Craig's part on the production side to be accurate. Yeah. And when you see the footage, it's sort of astonishing of how close they got to the look of the whole thing. And it does feel like this, you know, it feels like the sort of kangaroo court, you know?
Yeah.
And it's, and hot. It was very hot. You can see them all sweating for various different reasons in those scenes. But you know, it was that was a grueling. That whole part took a week to do, and you know, it's tough to sit there and go through scenes like that with your fellow actors are very patient, but I mean, they've read the script, so they know what's going to happen. But you're trying to. I mean, it's very subtle what the story is, the drama is at that point of the story, and you know, that was a tough part. Yeah, that was a tough part.
You were also in...
It was like a play, basically.
It was like a play.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you're also in the adaptation of one of my most recent favorite novels, The Terror, which is very different, also based on a real-life disaster, but with a very supernatural slant to it. How were you presented with that project? Because it's very weird.
I mean, it's like similar to this one. I got sent the script, I read it, and I loved it, and I'm told them that I want to do it.
Well, your character, Francis Cozier, I can never pronounce that correctly. He is such a fascinating character because he's a lush and he's heartbroken, but he's duty bound and also like in this horrible situation is the one man that will stand straight, I guess with Good Sir as well. He's the one man who will lead in these trying times. Was there anything about that character that you hoped was already inside of you?
Well, certainly the drinking part. I had some experience with that. I think at some point we all feel as though we're not being heard, we're not being listened to, that we know what the answers are and people are ignoring us. And he has a chip on his shoulder about that. And I think that in his case, I don't think he knew that he had that in him. One of the things that I discovered through the journey of that story was that he didn't realize that his will to survive was as strong as it was. And that was something that he discovered as the story goes on. And it was a surprise to him. Yeah.
I mean, I'm still in the middle of watching it, but
We haven't got to the end?
I haven't got to the end. I mean, I've read the book, so I know what happens.
It's
but
quite different.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was really excited about it just because it's such a great novel.
Particularly the ending, they readapted it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited.
Yeah, it's good.
I know it is. I have to ask this about Lane Price. You played Lane Price in Mad Men. How did you find out about him being killed off?
Everybody asked me about this. So we have read-throughs before. Used to have read-throughs before each episode, and before the read-through of episode 10, Matt said, "I want to talk to you afterwards." So my character in that one died in episode 12, and so he said, "Oh, let's hang around. I want to speak to you."
Hanging around.
And yeah, and then. After he'd spoken to everybody else, because he gives them all their notes, he said, "Let's go upstairs to my office." That's not a good sign. I knew something was up. Then I remember standing by the lift, the elevator to go upstairs, and he's a really fantastically interesting person. He's never any small talk with him. He's got a brilliant mind. And we're standing waiting for the lift to come, and he starts talking about the weather, that was odd as well. So by this time, I'm thinking things aren't going to go well. And then when we get to his office, he offers me some brandy, and that's when I knew that I was fucked. And I actually said, "Oh, fuck." And he goes, "Yeah, I'm really sorry. And I knew what was going to happen before he'd actually told me then at that point. Then he told me.
I will have to say, there's tying it back to Chernobyl because it is in the opening minutes, so it's not a big spoiler.
Spoilers.
Alert.
About to give something away.
But it's in the first 5 minutes. So,
dude,
do you want me to go? I can. Okay, I'll just have this. What is it like with Lane Price, playing a character who knows he's going to kill himself? How did you approach that role or that scene?
Well, I mean, what was so good about that is that it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And the car doesn't start. It was, Jaguars were famous for being these kind of, not brilliantly well-made cars. They often wouldn't start. So the whole joke was he was going to asphyxiate himself, and then the car won't start. And what was so clever about that was he fakes out the audience. Matt faked out the audience in setting up an expectation that Blaine was going to kill himself. And then the payoff is the car doesn't start, so it's a joke. So he's actually got you to a point where you think, well, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So then it is still a surprise at the end. I remember that one of the things that I spoke to about Matt about that episode with him was about the idea of someone going to a country, coming to America, going to any country, with the idea of trying to make a success of yourself, and that you can't go home until that's happened. You know, you can't. He couldn't go home with his tail between his legs, and because the shame would be too much. So, and that the idea of returning was just impossible. It'd be worse than any other outcome. So, and I also thought the way that he did it was also to make as much trouble as he could for the office. You know, for the people in the office. Other circumstances for other characters are slightly different, but it's still a statement. I think it's still a statement. I'm trying not to give
too much away. I know,
but you really landed me in it.
I apologize. So let's go to a tweet. Love that transition. So we have a tweet question. What aspect of your character do you associate or relate to most? #build series.
Well, I think just like I said earlier on, I think that one of the things that we can all identify with is the idea of that you know the answer to a problem and no one listens to you. I think that's fairly common, and in this case, that was part of it was part of the problem within that society is that and certainly one of the themes of the whole piece is that the idea is that there's the lies that were going on around the circumstances, and that the lies had become the accepted narrative and the truth, and that the people who knew the answers or knew the truth were being silenced and were being shut out.
I feel like I'm seeing a theme. So Moriarty.
Oh yeah.
David Robert Jones.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
All people who tried to destroy the world in one way or another.
Or Valery, even
Valery Legasov. Yeah, he was trying to save the world.
Exactly, but all these people who know more and no one's listening to them.
Well, in Moriarty's case, he doesn't want anybody to know. He's basic, except when he realized that Sherlock Holmes was. You got Sherlock Holmes coming after you. He's probably going to figure it out. So his idea was, he'll probably figure out what I'm trying to do. If I can get the story out there to other people, then they'll do it themselves. They'll then see this as a blueprint. The idea is that he creates the blueprint for World War II, and he shows them how you can make a lot of money out of industrialized warfare. So he actually at some point he wanted to get out there. Yeah. I mean, David Robert Jones. In that fourth season, I mean, when they came to me and said, "Do you want to come back?" I said that I was supposed to be a good guy.
Right.
I was supposed to come back as a good guy, and I think it all switched when they realized they had a season 5. So I started to read the scripts. I was like, "Wait, how did this happen?"
Really?
I suddenly turned into the villain. But I didn't care because I got to work with Leonard Nimoy, and that was basically, I said, I'll come back as long as I got scenes with Leonard.
His role on that show, this is Fringe, by the way, which is just one of my favorite shows of all time.
Yeah, it's become sort of like a little cult classic, that one.
It's so good. It's again, you're no stranger to science fiction, The Expanse, and obviously The Terror, but what was the weirdest thing you had to wrap your head around with that show, with Fringe?
Being shot 3 times in the back and split in half by the space-time continuum.
Yeah.
And still not dying, yeah.
Exactly. We do have we have 2 fan questions coming out over here.
Hi.
Garrett, thanks for being here. So, having studied in both the UK and the US, right? And I won't mention which school you went to, but I will say
Central
go
School of
Qs.
Speech and Drama.
Yes, in London. I was talking about Duke. I wasn't going to say, but
You're not a fan of Duke?
I'm a fan of Syracuse.
Oh, okay.
Go Orange.
I never understood that whole basketball thing.
Yeah. Well, lacrosse, we go at it too. But no, so my question is, considering your studies, Shakespeare, just your career in general, what would you describe as the most important thing you've learned about acting, whether it be the craft, the business aspect to it, or something you can pinpoint as a single thing that made you a better actor?
That's a good question.
That's a good question.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's an American, in inverted commas, method approach, or the sort of classical approach, which is starting from the outside in as opposed to the inside out, your responsibility is to convince people who are watching that you're convincing human being, you know? So you end up at the same place. And I think that you never use one way. You end up using, there's as many different sort of routes that have worked for you in the past. You can revisit them and figure out which way is going to help you. The most important thing is that you have to believe the circumstances that you're in, you know, because if you can't experience them, it's hard for an audience to experience them because you're that vessel for the audience to step into these stories. I think acting is, careers for actors have become very different from what they used to be. I think that there was the talent aspect of an actor's career, and then there was sort of the necessary kind of promotional aspects. But I think nowadays a lot of focus is put on you're essentially a tool for the promotion of something, you know, and I think it's very easy to get swept up in that. I think that you have to love it, you have to enjoy it, it has to be fun. And if you're having a hard time connecting to a character or to a story, you have to ask yourself, why aren't I enjoying this? Because I need to enjoy it. It has to be fun. Even something like this, which is a fairly grim sort of story. It's the circumstance of I mean, it's, you know, it's not a musical. It's it's a fairly, you know, it doesn't turn out well for a lot of people. But you have to enjoy the journey, you know, and if you're not enjoying it, I think you go back to ask yourself, how can I enjoy this? How can this be fun for me to do? You know? But really, whichever way that you can find your way to a part. I mean, I've heard stories of actors, very, very brilliant actors, who think of their roles purely in terms of colors. Other actors who couldn't find a part unless they had the right shoes on. And once they found the right shoes, then they felt that they could walk in, they got the character. It's other people who they need to write diaries for themselves, you know. It's an imaginative process, and whatever you can do to spark your imagination, and that imagination is the key. That will bring you into that world.
Brilliant.
How do you get into a role?
Well, I mean, like all the different ways.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you don't feel right, whatever's throwing you off, you try and figure out, why aren't I feeling right, and what's going to help me. And then I think that, you know, Stellan gave brilliant advice to Emily Watson on breaking the waves, and which I've thought about a lot. And because that was her first film job, she'd done a lot of theatre, and she said, "Well, have you got any advice for me?" And he said, "Don't aim for anything, just let go."
That is good advice. We have one more fan question.
Hi, I'm Lily.
Nice jacket.
Oh, thank you.
Wait, what's on the back?
It says love and peace.
Nice. Who can't get behind that idea?
I know. Considering all of the historical figures you've played and all of the sci-fi beings you've played, do you believe that aliens are among us and that time travel is real? And if so, how do you postulate that existence? Are we the aliens we seek?
So...
Do you believe in aliens?
Is time travel
possible?
real?
I mean, you're British, so you grew up with Doctor Who, so...
Yeah. Do I believe in aliens? I mean,
It's a very left of center question.
Yeah, it's like... I don't really believe in aliens. I think we're pretty bad at keeping secrets. I think that if that had happened, we would know about it. You know, there was most likely, if we came into contacts with some sort of alien being, it's a virus or something on a meteorite that's arrived that way. You know, I don't think it's going to be something that you can talk to and interact with. And probably we've interacted in on some sort of viral level with aliens already. Do I think time travel is real? Again, it's fun. It's fun to be in time travel stories, but it doesn't seem likely. On that level, though, I do think that there was a really interesting thing that came out not long ago about one of the experiments that was done at the Hadron Collider. It proved that that we live in a multiverse. Right. Although I don't know what you do with information like that. You know what I mean? Because if it's happening all the time, it's still not affecting this particular version of reality that we're in at the moment. So, but if you could change things, I can think of a couple of things that I'd like to change. Some bad decisions during that last World Cup for a start.
I do have one last question about Chernobyl, and it's because it's such a powerful piece of television. What do you want audiences to feel and think about when the series is over? What do you want them to go forward with?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the overall theme of the show is an examination of what happens when you live in a society, you live in a state where you no longer expect to be told the truth, and that you become cynical to how your government works. I mean, there's that joke in the story about a Soviet machine that chops apples into three pieces.
It's like four pieces.
Three pieces.
Cut as a Soviet machine that can cut things into.
Yeah, there's such a cynical attitude towards the way the state operates and what they're told and what their place is in it. That they just accept it. And the second that happens, you allow the state to do whatever it wants. If you're no longer able to hold power to account, things go very, very, very badly wrong. So again, that's one of the themes that Craig was after, and it was about how dangerous is a lie.
Yeah.
And if you think about that, there's that one lie at the core of the story, which has a disastrous effect.
And I think, especially in this day and age, that is a message that we really desperately need.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jared.
That one.
Yeah. Chernobyl airs on May 6th of the 5-part miniseries. Thank you so much, Jared. And thank you so much for watching.
Thank you very much. Thank you.